Imagine a forest path, a trail you walk every day. With every step, the ground becomes firmer, the rut deeper. Eventually, this path is so worn that it seems almost impossible to leave it and simply walk cross-country. Exactly this image is often used by neuroscientists to describe what happens in the brain during severe depression or anxiety disorders. Thoughts circle in stuck, negative loops. Biologically speaking, these metaphorical forest paths are neuronal superhighways that are so heavily trafficked that alternatives wither away. For a long time, we thought this neuronal road network was largely rigid in adulthood. But today, we are diving deep into research that doesn't just question this dogma, but pulverizes it. We are talking about substances that don't simply lift the mood, but can radically rebuild the physical architecture of our thinking organ. And within hours, we are talking about psilocybin and the new science of so-called psychoplastogens. Welcome to this deep dive. To understand why the current findings are so revolutionary, we first need to look at what actually goes wrong in the brain during chronic stress or depression. It is namely not just a chemical imbalance, as is often claimed. It is a structural problem. Investigations show that neurons in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning, decision-making, and personality, atrophy. They retract their little branches, the dendrites. They lose their contact points, the synapses. The brain literally loses complexity and flexibility. Here, a new class of active ingredients enters the stage. Researchers around David Olson and Calvin Lai coined the term psychoplastogens in the year 2018. These are substances that measurably and rapidly stimulate the growth of new neuronal connections. And psilocybin, the active ingredient from the so-called magic mushrooms, is the most prominent representative of this class. But what does growth mean here specifically? Is that just a vague metaphor? No. Thanks to modern imaging, we know it very precisely today. A groundbreaking study by Lingxiao Xiao and colleagues from Yale University, published in the journal Neuron, made this visible using 2-photon microscopy in living mice. They were able to observe individual nerve cells in time-lapse. The result was astounding. Just 24 hours after a single dose of psilocybin, the neurons in the frontal cortex formed new connections. More precisely, the density of the so-called dendritic spines, these are the tiny receiving stations for signals from other nerve cells, grew by about 10%. And the crucial thing about it, these new connections were not fleeting. They were stable and could still be detected even a month after the single administration. 10% more connectivity triggered by a single intervention. That is a massive value in neurology. But how does a molecule manage that? How do you get a fully grown nerve cell to suddenly sprout again like in spring? The answer lies deep in the molecular machinery of the cell. Studies by Li et al., as well as work by the Central Institute of Mental Health in Mannheim, have decoded the mechanism. When psilocybin, or rather its active metabolite psilocin, arrives in the brain, it docks primarily at the serotonin receptor 5-HT2A. That is the starting signal. This receptor then activates a cascade that stimulates the so-called TrkB receptor. TrkB is normally the docking site for BDNF. BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It is often casually called the fertilizer of the brain. Psilocybin thus ensures that the cell believes it is swimming in growth factors. This in turn activates a protein complex called mTOR. mTOR is the site manager of the cell. It gives the order, synthesize proteins, build scaffolding, grow. Interestingly, this is exactly the same signaling pathway that ketamine uses, another highly effective, fast-acting antidepressant. Although ketamine and psilocybin enter the house through completely different doors, ketamine via the glutamate system, psilocybin via the serotonin system, they meet in the living room at the same light switch, the activation of mTOR and structural plasticity. A current transcriptome study by Liao et al. From the year 2025 has confirmed this on a genetic level. They found that psilocybin and ketamine trigger surprisingly similar gene expression patterns in the frontal cortex. It seems as if there were a universal molecular healing path for neuronal atrophy. But, and that is the point where we really have to go into depth today, growth alone does not explain healing. If I simply build new roads wildly in a city, I don't solve a traffic problem. I need a plan. How does the brain know which connections it should strengthen and which it should break down? Here, a brand new study by Quan Jiang and Alex Quan from Cornell University, published in the year 2025, provides perhaps the most important insight of the last few years. The researchers used a technique that sounds almost like science fiction: monosynaptic rabies virus tracing. They took the rabies virus, which is normally deadly because it jumps so efficiently from nerve cell to nerve cell, and modified it genetically. They made it a harmless, glowing mapping tool that can make exactly one single jump from one cell to the next. With this, they could see exactly who is talking to whom. How does the map of the brain change after psilocybin? The result refutes the idea that psilocybin simply creates chaos in the head. Instead, they found a very specific rewiring. First, psilocybin massively strengthened the connections from sensory areas, i.e., the areas that process seeing, hearing, and feeling, towards subcortical and frontal regions. The brain thus physically opens itself to information from outside. The world becomes more urgent, more vivid again. Second, and this is decisive for depression treatment, it weakened the internal corticocortical loops. Particularly affected were areas that resemble the so-called default mode network. That network which is active when we think about ourselves, ruminate, worry. Imagine that, the biological basis of the compulsion to brood, these trodden paths of negative thinking, are physically broken down or weakened, while at the same time the paths to the outside world, to the perception of the here and now, are physically reinforced. That is the neuronal signature of an expansion of consciousness. But Jiang and his team made yet another discovery that changes everything. They asked themselves, does this remodeling simply happen automatically just because the substance is in the blood? To test this, they artificially blocked the activity in a certain brain region during the psilocybin effect. The result was clear. In the region that was silenced, no rewiring took place. In the active regions, however, it did. Let us pause briefly to understand the magnitude of this insight. This means psilocybin is not a bricklayer who simply pulls up a wall. Psilocybin is rather like soft cement. It makes the brain malleable. But which form it takes in the end depends on which neuronal circuits are active during the effect. This finally gives us the hard neurobiological proof for something that therapists have intuitively known since the 60s. The concept of set and setting is not an esoteric framework, it is a biological variable. If a patient experiences a therapeutic session under the influence of psilocybin in which he feels safe and adopts new, positive perspectives, then exactly these neuronal patterns fire. And because the brain is in a hyperplastic state due to the substance, exactly these new patterns are physically solidified, cemented, if you will. However, if the experience takes place in a fear-filled environment or without therapeutic guidance, theoretically, maladaptive patterns could also be reinforced. The plasticity is neutral. It reinforces what happens. What does this mean for the future of medicine? We are moving away from the idea that we simply have to chemically bathe brains, as we often try with classic antidepressants, the SSRIs. We are moving towards an assisted psychotherapy where the medication is just the door opener. The studies by Liao, Xiao, and Jiang show us a time window. There's an early phase, directly after ingestion, in which the genes for synaptic plasticity are massively upregulated, and there's a late phase about 72 hours later, in which these changes stabilize. This means that the days after the experience, the so-called integration phase, are neurobiologically almost just as important as the experience itself. We see here, therefore, a convergence of the sciences. Molecular biology explains the fertilizer to us, BDNF and mTOR. Electrophysiology and virus tracing show us the new roads, network reconfiguration. And clinical psychology delivers the blueprint for these roads. In summary, it can be said, psychedelics like psilocybin work by putting the rigid, atrophied brain of a depressive patient back into a state that resembles the flexibility of a child's brain. They open a window of possibilities. But it is up to the therapeutic work what we let in through this window and what new paths we lay out in this newly won landscape. It is a fascinating time for the neurosciences. We are finally beginning to not only understand the biological hardware of our deepest psychological processes, but to be able to heal them specifically. We would like to thank you very much for spending this episode with us. Your support and your interest mean a lot to us. We hope that you were able to take away exciting insights and valuable food for thought. Stay curious, informed, and inspired. Together we shape a better future. As always, we wish everyone a long, healthy, and happy life. Until next time.